Hello, and welcome to the second session of the Life Sciences Digital Transformation webcast series presented by Moss Adams. Today's topic will be focused on strategies to improve cybersecurity. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Moss Adams, I would like to welcome you to part 2 of our 3-part series, Digital Transformation for Life Sciences Companies. All companies, regardless of industry and size, are investing a lot into digital transformation. By using technology to automate processes and data flow, companies can run leaner, but there are risks. How do you coordinate the technology into your processes? What is the impact on your cybersecurity? Is your current system sufficient, or do you need to make some changes? These questions are all interrelated, and we will address each question. Last week, we talked about how companies can strengthen their internal processes by utilizing technology. Next week, we will discuss ways to improve your IT systems and infrastructures. Companies are continuously implementing new software or new SaaS services. How do you find comfort in making sure you choose the best software for your situation? When do you need to change or upgrade? Are you optimizing the use of your software? Our enterprise systems teams will walk you through the processes that they go through in helping companies figure out what systems are best for them. But today, our cybersecurity team will discuss strategies to improve your security posture and what all life sciences companies should be doing to protect their valuable data and IP. There are many bad actors that are looking to find and exploit vulnerabilities in your information systems, regardless of your online presence. These actors may steal your IP, your financial data, or employee information and sit on it for years, and you may not realize it. These 3 topics, internal controls, cybersecurity, and systems and infrastructure, are all linked together, which makes it all the more challenging. My name is Richard Croghan, and I will be your moderator. However, the stars of the show will be Devin Osterhout and Ryan Stewart. Devin is a manager in our consulting group who specializes in cybersecurity consulting. Ryan is a senior manager in our consulting group, also specializing in cybersecurity. During today's presentation, we encourage all participants to use the Q&A feature during the call. To the extent that we have time, we will address your questions throughout the call and at the end. If there are unanswered questions at the end of our time, we'll follow up after. Now I will turn it over to Devin, who will kick off the presentation.
Thank you, Rich. Appreciate it. So this is our agenda for what we'll cover today. First, we'll kind of talk about why cybersecurity is important to your business, right? Which I know Rich covered a little bit, but we'll go into a little more detail. Then we'll cover 8 foundational areas that kind of make up what we consider basic cyber hygiene. We'll go into those in more detail. And then we'll briefly discuss how, kind of what's next, where to go after that. And then we'll wrap up with, okay, once we've achieved our basic security cyber hygiene, how do we get to that next level? So we'll cover that briefly as well. So to start with, what are your company's crown jewels, right? They're your secret sauce, right? They're what could be clinical trial information, could be research results. It could be anything that distinguishes you from your competitors. It's how you provide value to the world. So you can bet that other people are interested in having them and potentially selling them, right? So the question is, where are they? Typically, they're on computers, right? They may be computers on your network. They may be computers in the cloud. But, as we're going through this digital transformation, most companies' crown jewels are on their computers. So then the question is, how do we lose them? And essentially, what could happen is someone could click on a link within an email, which opens that door into your network or into your cloud environment. Or it could be somebody on the phone who's asking just the right questions to get the information they need to get into your network or into your cloud environment. And as Rich kind of alluded to before, will you know if you've lost those crown jewels? And there's a good chance you won't. With an average dwell time of 3 weeks from when an attacker enters a network to when they're actually discovered by a security team, it's easy to see that they can be there for a while. And some criminal groups, some nation states will actually stay on your network for years, right? We've seen they will stay on the network and wait for new information to come and gather that information as it's generated. But for small companies, unfortunately, often the first indication they have that they've been breached is when they see a ransomware message pop up on their desktops, right? And their network grinds to a halt. And if you haven't heard of ransomware, essentially that's where criminals will encrypt all of your data and then sell you access back to that data instead of selling it to others, right? So some criminals try and do both, of course. But then the final question here you can see is, can you prevent the loss? So it kind of depends on how prepared you are and how committed the attacker is, right? Unless they're being told by their boss that they have to get onto your computers, most attackers and criminals take advantage of opportunities, right? And so if you can apply practical security through these basic hygiene measures, then you can kind of remove some of those opportunities and decrease the odds of an attacker choosing your network. They'll probably look at somebody else who's less secure. So what is basic cyber hygiene? As I mentioned earlier, there are 8 main focus areas that we'll go through in more detail. These are based on the CIS, or the Center for Internet Security, which is a community-driven, not-for-profit organization for security professionals. And they've set a group of critical security controls into different implementation groups that can be implemented based on your maturity, based on your company's security program. So what they define as the minimum necessary for basic cyber hygiene is a foundation of 56 cyber defense safeguards out of a total of 153 safeguards. So these 8 areas, we've kind of condensed those 56 controls into these 8 areas. And we'll go through each of these in more depth, like I said. So as we go through, like Rich said, please, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we can answer them either if we see them. If we don't see them, we'll catch them at the end. So please feel free to include those. Okay, so we'll start off with the first one, which is security awareness and training. And essentially, the question is, are your users required to understand that there are security threats and that there is a reality that they could be targeted, right? If they're not already being targeted. So you'll see these terms: phishing, social engineering. If you haven't had them explained, essentially phishing is your employees are the fish and people are trying to catch them by sending emails or by getting on the phone. Social engineering typically is more of the phone calls, right, where they're calling and acting like they're a service person that's needs some important information, and they will get the information needed to access your network, right? They're looking for usernames, passwords, other information that could be used to answer security questions. You may also hear the term BEC, which stands for business email compromise. So that's another flavor of phishing that tends to be very targeted at the senior leadership of the company or specific employees, right? We've come a long ways. 15 years ago, it was a prince in the foreign country needing you to help wire money out of that country, and that's how they were trying to trick us. Right now, it's become much more targeted and much more believable. So the emails, are going to your controller and they're coming from the CFO, and it looks very real. So, are your users trained to check that email address, to check the source of that email address before wiring funds? Are they trained to inspect the URL before clicking on any links or images in their emails? Is the system configured to provide a disclaimer if that email is coming from an external company, or if your company deals with a lot of external companies, so that's a high percentage of your email. There are other approaches and logic that can be applied to identify suspicious emails. So those are things that training your users becomes critically important, right? We often get called in by boards of directors after companies have been breached, and they want us to kind of provide an external assessment of their IT environment to see if their security is improved. And the majority of those cases, the breach was caused by a phishing campaign, right? So somebody clicked on a link and opened the door into their network, right? But luckily, there are many ways we can provide this training. That there are many platforms out there that are available that you can have thousands of different phishing emails that you can send to your employees, and you can actually measure the results, and you can tailor the training based on the results, right? You can provide as much training or as little training as you need to help employees become familiar with what those look like, because it is a common thing that many of you have probably seen. So moving beyond security awareness and training, we're going to step into identity and access management. And we're going to review some of the principles that are very important from a security perspective around identity and access management. The first one is least privilege. So not everyone needs administrative access, right? If non-administrators, just normal users, have that access, essentially the number of fish in the sea increases, right? And if one of them clicked on a link and now the attacker has admin credentials, they can wreak a lot more damage to your network and spread a lot faster and deeper into your network. Segregation of duties is another principle that's very important, right? Here, the concept is that to make major changes, it requires kind of more than one approval, right? And kind of at the inverse of that, also, you don't want to have one person that has access to the password, right? You need to make sure there are multiple people that can do some of those important things within your IT environment. We've definitely worked with a company. We had one client where there was a member of the IT team who kind of had an unfortunate episode, and they thought that the company was under a ransomware attack, and they thought somebody on the IT team had installed that ransomware. And so, if you couldn't guess, this person, they started shutting down systems. They started removing access to files. They started removing access to the IT team. And so this was a major event that the company, took over a year to recover from, and they had to revert many of their digital efforts back to manual efforts to kind of handle some of those processes within the company. So that is a critical thing that segregation of duties is done correctly. Another thing is reviews, right? Attackers are known to create new accounts after they get into your network. And if you're not reviewing those accounts, you may not notice that there is an unknown user within your network. But also sometimes these reviews could see a normal user who is always in one location logging in from multiple locations. And sometimes it's multiple locations around the world. And so they kind of call that the impossible login, where If you're doing those reviews, you can spot, hey, somebody, they're not behaving normally, right? So those reviews can help identify that. The next thing is privileged access management. So essentially, right, if your administrators are using, they typically should have 2 accounts. That's best practice, right? They have their administrative account and they have their normal account for, taking care of email and those kinds of things for work. So if they're using that administrative account more than they should, then it just increases the risk, right? So there are tools that can actually do just-in-time administrative access. We won't go into great detail, but you can add a lot up to your privileged access management program if you're interested in that. And then finally, there are robust authentication methods are critical, right? Complex passwords. If you don't know, there are many dictionary attacks where they can brute force your applications if they're not developed correctly, and guess simple passwords quickly and gain access to your systems. So you may hear the term MFA, which stands for multi-factor authentication. And so the concept behind that is you need more than one thing to access the system to authenticate. You either need something that you have, something that you know, or something that you are kind of the 3 main factors. So, it can be a password, it can be a hardware token, it can be, a security question combined with something else, a fingerprint. But having multiple of those makes it harder for an attacker to gain access to your network. And finally, just around this, centralizing your account management is also something that is best practice. So if you have multiple applications, if you can centralize that into one centralized service, then it's easier to secure that service and not have multiple passwords that the user has to keep track of and write down and leave available to potential attackers. All right. So after it, we're going to go to a polling question. So I'll turn it over to Rich.
All right, Devin, thanks. So now everybody, as you know, this presentation qualifies for CPE, and you have to answer 3 out of the 4 polling questions. The first one is, which of the following is not a factor used for authentication? So just making sure that you're paying attention. You can download the slides and look back if you need some help. Doesn't really matter if you get it right or wrong. We just need to make sure that you are there and listening. So we'll give everyone some time because we know that it's important for people to get that CPE if needed. Devin, one question kind of came in pretty quickly. I think when you're going through that list of the practical security list and the things that you're going through, and they asked about penetration testing because it wasn't on the list. Where would that fit into some sort of cybersecurity program?
No, that's a great question. It's definitely a part of kind of your vulnerability management program typically. So a penetration test, there are multiple types. You can have a network penetration test where, somebody that's on your side, right? You kind of coordinate it with your IT team. They try and break into your network. And so it's coordinated because there's a lot of scanning involved, looking at what kind of devices are on the network. But that's one type, network. And then another one is application, right? Where they test the application and kind of do what an attacker would do and see if there's, obvious vulnerabilities that can be closed. So it's definitely an important part of security. And if you're to that point, it's a great thing to do.
Okay. Great question. Thanks for asking it and thanks for responding to it. So we're wrapping up. We're going to close it out. And it looks like we have a mixed bag, but again, the answers aren't as important, just making sure that you answer. And I'll turn it back over to Devin to continue on.
Hey, the majority got it right, so good job. Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of tricky because when you were born could be a question that right? So it could be a factor essentially, but good job. All right, so the next section is around inventories, right? And this is actually a very critical part of your security program. Having an accurate device and software inventory is very important because you can't protect what you don't know that you have, right? So if you may hear the term shadow IT, and that can be challenging because what essentially it means is when a department or a group within the company adds their own hardware, their own software, and they aren't doing that in coordination with, whoever at the company, if it's the IT department that's responsible for maintaining those inventories, that hardware and software that's added doesn't get the same security process on top of it, right? And we'll talk more about patching, but it's not checking for patching or end of life and some of those things that are critical for your software and your devices. So inventories are very important, right? There's different types of inventories you can maintain. If you're a small company just starting, usually you see an Excel spreadsheet, right? It's a manual process where as they buy computers and software, they just add them to a spreadsheet, but at least they know, okay, this is what we expect. And if we see anything else on the network that's not on this list, it's a red flag and we need to dig into it. Second type is passive. And this is where you put a device, a piece of software on your network that's just listening to all the network traffic going by. And it's using, certain flags to tell which devices are on the network, right? So this, it's less work up front, and so it's usually a little cheaper, but it's not as comprehensive as if you do an active tool or product that actually scans your network, looking across your entire IP space for any devices on that network, right? And so this requires more work up front to set up, but it also is more comprehensive, gives you a better picture into your network. And of course, you can do both, right? You don't have to do one or the other, but it all depends on, your needs and your capacity and the maturity of your security organization. So the benefits, right? So I kind of talked a little bit about how it's hard to protect what you don't know you have. If you have this list and something comes out in the news, right? If you remember the end of the last year, Log4j was big news across the tech industry, at least, and I think it caught some major headline articles, but it was a major flaw in a well-used logging software, right? And so it was pretty prevalent in the world. And if you have your inventories, you'll know which servers have which applications, which ones need to be remediated, and it's going to simplify that process. But as I kind of talked about shadow IT, another benefit of having this accurate inventory list is for servers and software that make it onto the decommission list, right? So okay, we need to get rid of this and we need to make a proactive effort for whatever service is on it to move it to a new server or to move that function to new software because the software is no longer being supported. That's what attackers look for, right? They look for old servers, old software that has vulnerabilities, right? And so having that list is an important step. So with that being said, I'm going to step into the next section, which is vulnerability management, right? So as we get into this, I kind of talked about, these old decommissioned servers. And I think I didn't click the right button. Sorry. I think we're still on. There we go. Vulnerability management. Sorry about that. So they're kind of, your vulnerability management program usually can be multi-pronged. These are the two that I'm going to talk about today. We did kind of mention pen testing, right, as part of your vulnerability management program. I want to talk about antivirus and patching, right? So I'm actually going to reverse the order and kind of start with patching because we were just talking about inventories. All software has bugs. So don't be surprised that software has bugs. Developers and entire testing teams are focused on finding those bugs during the development process, and they find many of them and they fix many of them, but unfortunately they don't fix all the bugs, right? And so there are researchers, security researchers that are out there looking for bugs. There are criminals that are out there looking for bugs. There are attackers that are out there looking for bugs because those bugs can have unintended consequences that will allow, when we call those vulnerabilities, but they can allow people to do things with that program that was not intended enough, and that can be access your network. So as these bugs are found, if it's a security researcher, they will let the company know that developed that software, and they will issue a patch, right? A piece of software that you run that will update that software and hopefully remove that bug. So patching is very important. If you don't do that, that is exactly what criminals are looking for. They're looking for those old versions with known vulnerabilities so they can easily get into your network. Now, antivirus is a slightly different angle on the security threat, and this is when these vulnerabilities in software programs are found, they often get written, a program will get written to actually leverage those vulnerabilities, and they call that a virus, right? And so they'll take that virus and they'll put it in your network, and it will take advantage of whatever that vulnerability is, and it'll get into your network and cause problems. And so the antivirus software will write signatures, they call them, right, where they kind of hash those programs, and they look for everything on your network, and they look for that specific signature. So you can kind of see in the third bullet, they're either signature-based or heuristic-based. So heuristic-based just means they're looking for behaviors, right? So maybe they can change the signature quickly, just change a small part of the virus itself so it morphs, but it does the same actions on your network, right? So antivirus is critical, right? There's a lot out there to choose from. Like you can see, there's variable functionality and cost. So you can kind of do some research into what is the best fit for your organization. It does require maintenance, requires updates, but it also gives you visibility into what your fleet of your inventory of devices looks like. Are they healthy? Are they in a good place? And if a virus pops up, you'll get an alert, right? If a known virus pops up. So after vulnerability management, we have another polling question. So go ahead, Rich.
Thanks, Devin. All right, our second polling question. Vulnerability management consists of which two activities? So again, we're making sure that you're paying attention here. If you downloaded the slides, you can look back. And we'll give everyone a minute or so to answer so that they get credit for answering these questions. Devin, one other question kind of came in, and I hope it's just curiosity. They're asking if a ransomware attack happens, should they pay the ransom?
That is another great question, right? And it's a loaded question because it really depends on how well your company has the ability to recover, right? Do you have offsite backups from which you can restore? Because a lot of the ransomware attackers look for backups, and Ryan's going to talk more about this, but they will actually encrypt your backups too, right? So they make it so you almost have to pay to get your data back. So I'm not going to say that I encourage paying, but it really depends on the situation and how prepared you are for that. But ransomware is it's a scary thing, right? It's not something to joke around about. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, everyone, if you last chance to select an answer, and don't forget to hit submit. Sometimes that doesn't go through, but we will then move on. And I think most people are listening.
Yeah, good job. Impressive. I actually, the question's not good because we talked about pen testing. I should have made it 3, but I didn't know that question was going to come up. So.
All right. And then, all right, back to you.
Okay. All right. The next area is auditing and logging, right? So if there are questions about this, please put them in the chat. But, essentially logging can happen at many layers within your system, right? It can happen at the application layer. So the application you're using can log, each action that a user takes. The operating system of the computer that's hosting that application can also be logging things related to that operating system, the number of connections, what the memory looks like, what the CPU is doing, like all of those things can be logged as well. There's many layers to logging, right? But it is super important for a couple of reasons, right? One is first operational improvements, right? So it's beneficial from a business perspective to be able to look at how is my system operating at large, right? Is one process a bottleneck, right? Or is another process over provisioned and we should kind of decrease that? So you can look at between processes, but you can also just look at it from the operation of your business. And that varies a lot between businesses. But if you have proper logs, you can kind of see, how long does this manual process take, and there's ways we can improve that even, right? So it gives you that visibility, but not only can logs be helpful operationally, they can also be helpful from a forensics perspective, right? They can help you see how an attacker got into your network and what they did once they were in your network, right? But of course, attackers know this, and so they will often try to go in and edit the logs or delete the logs that kind of leave a trail of what they did. So they want to remove that evidence. So if your logs are not protected correctly, then you can have a hard time doing your forensics analysis. So one more thing I'll just kind of mention about logging that is also best practice, right, is to centralize those logs. So like I kind of said, each computer can have its own logs and store them on those computers separately. So you can have logs across, 15 different application servers, a database server, 300 end user devices. You can imagine that doing any sort of analytics on that from an operational or a forensics perspective would be difficult. So if we can centralize those logs into one place, it helps do that deeper analysis. And it also makes it easier to kind of protect those logs, right? You can apply proper security to that central log server. But logging and auditing is very important, because if you don't have it, you're definitely not going to know that you got attacked for the most part, right? That's a bold statement, but logging is kind of the way to know and to figure out what happened. So I'm going to turn over the next screen to Ryan, who's going to talk about data protection, backups, and recovery.
Thank you, Devin. Before I begin, looks like we have a question in the Q&A about an active ransomware attack in Mansfield, Texas. I'm in Texas, but I have not heard that, and I monitor the news regularly. But after this webcast, I'll definitely be looking into that, since I have children in school. I think the last big ransomware attack that happened in Texas affected several counties and took them down. So definitely serious issues and things that you yourself and businesses should be monitoring. So moving into data protection, backup, and data recovery. Devin mentioned crown jewels, and for most of the folks on the phone, likely your crown jewel is your data. We're a data-centric world now, and everybody relies on it in one aspect or another. And so when we talk about data protection, we first want to talk about, the data classifications within your organization. What's the most sensitive, what's the most highly valued data assets, because that is really going to help determine what data protections you put in place, how you access it, who uses it, does it remain uncorrupted, is it available? And in the security world, we commonly refer to that as the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. So, when you're thinking about the data that you use each day, think about who has access to that data and whether or not they're authorized to make changes to the data, whether or not it's protected with the right security measures in transit and in storage. Because even if it's in storage, there may be controls at the DMZ, firewalls, and all of those other things, but there certainly needs to be a level of encryption on those storage environments to make sure that should you be hit with ransomware, it could prevent you from having to pay some regulatory fine, depending on what regulations apply to your organization. As far as data in transit, since we're sending data back and forth between emails, internal networks, external networks, you certainly want to think about how's that data protected while it's in transit. Get with your IT folks, ask the hard questions. If you are an IT person, take a look at your firewall settings, things like that, and make sure you're using the most up-to-date transport layer security. So along with data, we also have data leak and data loss prevention. And so those are protections, somewhat, it's an ongoing thing with email. I'm sure many people on here have sent out an email that could have potentially had sensitive information in it, and it got blocked by your organization or had to be released after somebody else reviewed it. But that's an example of a data loss protection. They want to make sure that if you're sending out a file that has numbers in it that mirror Social Security numbers, that you're sending it to the right people. It's kind of like you're double checked to make sure you don't send it to somebody that shouldn't be receiving it. And also, it's normally going to be encrypted. If not, Those are questions to bring to your IT department to ask, how can we get this data when I email it encrypted? They may tell you use a secure file transfer. There could be other mechanisms in place available to you to use. So as far as data integrity, given what many of you probably have to work with each day in the life sciences realm, could be clinical trial data. I noticed on the attendees list, there were a lot of CFOs out there. So the financial data, certainly want to make sure that you have some type of file integrity monitoring system in place. It's not the end all be all, but it's just another control that you can put in place to make sure that, if data gets changed, it's being monitored and you can find out who changed it and go back and either recover the data to the latest restore of that particular file, restore point, and then, help prevent that from happening again. But, attacks on data integrity are rising. Ransomware has been around for a while now. Everybody's, pretty familiar with it. But just like every attack, even ransomware is starting to get more complex. Going back to that question about do you pay the ransom? It is a complex situation because there's a lot of unknowns. You have your cyber insurance you need to consult with, your legal department. Do you have the money? If you pay it, are you going to get the files back? So traditional ransomware is encrypted, pay the ransom, hopefully you get it back. But destructive malware is a type of ransomware where it absolutely destroys your file, and even if you pay the ransom, your data is gone. You're just paying to pay. So just be cognizant of those types of different attacks so that you know what questions to ask your senior leadership, or if you identify something within your department where maybe you can make a recommendation. Say, I really think I've had this problem occur several times. My file just disappears. I'm just really not confident that the information that I'm getting back is the latest information. That's where your backups and recovery start to come into place. And so a lot of factors there to consider. It's not just data, raw data. We're talking about files, databases, operating system images. IT department does maintain those types of things. They want to make sure that they are protecting the software so that it's not manipulated and then go and install it across the organization, and now they have infected software. So just a lot of different things that can happen if you're not monitoring your storage and your backups. So are your backups protected? They should have the same level of security or more than your production environment. But if you're backing up data, you certainly want to have it encrypted. You want to check to see how often it's overwritten. When is it going to be archived? Is it continuous data protection? Basically replication where, it's kind of in real time, things like that. Who's responsible? I think that's an excellent question to ask senior leadership and find out who's responsible. And just real world example there is I did a lot of incident response exercises at a previous organization I was with. It tended to run all day, and the exercise started out with infected workstations. And about after 2 or 3 hours, I decided to ask, because I like to see where things go. Hey, has anybody checked your crown jewels? Has anybody checked your patient databases? And the first response was, we don't even know who to contact. So, that's eyebrow raising, and really can be something that is important, because if that's your crown jewel, then while it's important to get users up and running, it's also important to make sure that desktop infections aren't a sign of something else bigger happening in the background that could be distracting you. Let's see here. I'm going to move on.
All right.
Okay,
I'll jump in, and this is the third polling question for those of you that want CPE, make sure that you answer this. Which of the following would not be of interest to an attacker? So I'll let you answer that. Select and hit submit. And Ryan, in the meantime, another question came in. What are the 3 most important things that small businesses should do immediately to protect themselves from ransomware?
So immediately would be to, humans are the biggest threat to data and businesses. So the immediate thing to do would be to educate your workforce and help them understand what ransomware is, how it can be brought into the environment. And you can do those things through methods that Devin mentioned earlier. Phishing is a type of attack, but there's also phishing campaigns. And so what that does is kind of give you an idea of how your workforce is aware of what's going on and how well they are paying attention to your security training. The data backups, certainly important. That's it's not necessarily protecting you from ransomware. It's kind of helping you recover from a ransomware attack. But, at the end of the day, you want to make sure you have access to your data. But certainly filtering, firewall settings, all of those things, making sure you have authorized traffic coming into your environment. Those are all beneficial things to look at.
And I want to add one thing, if it's all right. There's kind of this rule called the 3-2-1 rule that, I would recommend for, small companies to look at. And essentially what that's saying is you want to have 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types, and one of those should be offsite, right? So there's a lot of ways you can go there, right? You can go tape if you want, but, obviously that's not going to get ransomware. But, yeah, that's the concept, right? So if you can figure out a way to do that, it puts you in a better spot if ransomware does come to at least be able to get to your data still.
Right. And there's some things we're going to get into later around incident response that'll help with detecting, that process of detecting attacks within your network. But, you have to be able to identify what the attack is and if something nefarious is going on within your environment. Small organizations may have managed service providers who are watching their network. And so certainly want to get with those managed services to find out what they are doing to help prevent those types of attacks or at least reduce. I don't think anything's 100% preventable. You have to look at it from a risk perspective and how well could you reduce the risk of ransomware in your environment.
All right, thanks. So we'll wrap up polling question number 3 here. Which of the following would not be of interest? I think C was the answer, but again, you're not being graded. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
All right. So incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity, just ask you to think about cyber resilience. That's really what the big focus of this is how resilient is your organization when it comes to a cyber attack? Because it's not, if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. It's a common saying, but it's true. Most organizations are being attacked every day. They are preventing those attacks from, causing anything major within their organization. But as part of those protocols, when they identify that attack is occurring or has occurred, they have their incident response plans. And so those incident response plans should be tested on a regular basis. That goes into your planning. The staff should be trained, and it should encompass members of, from many different departments, SME from departments attending that incident response exercise, if possible, is beneficial because you get a lot of different perspectives on how those departments are going to be affected. And so another key piece of information into how departments will be affected is a business impact analysis. There are a lot of organizations that, they strive to perform a thorough business impact analysis. It's a challenging process. It's very time consuming. A lot of them have to outsource that type of analysis because of the large amount of data that's being collected and analyzed, and that feeds into the incident response plan, the disaster recovery and business continuity plans. So, the purpose of the business impact analysis, identify critical data, critical business functions, services, IT equipment, all of those things that are dependent on one another. So that you can only go so long without having access to your data before it becomes very critical. When data is inaccessible, it may not just be inaccessible to internal customers, employees, but your external customers. And so probably not a lot of banks who can survive a long downtime without their customers having access to perform transactions. But you won't know that, the impact unless you can guesstimate, we could operate without payroll function for a week because we only perform payroll at certain times of the month. Okay, well, if all that employee data is wiped out, how long is it going to take you now to get payroll up and running? Are you going to have to go to manual process and write checks? Well, if your company's 10,000 people, how long is it going to take to produce checks, get it out to the employees, and now they're going to start having complaints that they're not getting paid on time. So then you're starting to talk about reputational impact. So a lot of different factors to consider there. When it comes to incident response, timely response is critical. Devin mentioned, 3 weeks to identify an attack. And so it could be 3 weeks to identify it, but it could be much longer to recover from it. And so that's where the training and testing of your plans to make sure that they're realistic plans and you can, follow through with those plans is important. And that's why we want to test it. So this is going to kind of be a transition into one of the next sections, supply chain risk management, but sharing and receiving information both internally and externally from your suppliers regarding incidents is critical. As I mentioned, managed service providers or any of those other services that you may have that are external, if they get attacked, that can have an effect on your organization as well. And so keeping that line of communication open, knowing who to contact in case your patient database is corrupted and it needs to be recovered, maybe you have to reach out to a certain vendor to get that information back, but you want to have that list together on who to contact. So the cyber supply chain management, cyber supply chain risk management, this is where we're keeping security in mind when we're onboarding suppliers. Most organizations are starting to get on board with this, and when they do a contract for services, they want to vet that supplier to make sure that the supplier doesn't have any problems, just kind of like a background check that you would do on your employees. You're checking out that supplier to make sure that they haven't had any issues. Go to the news. If you are a hospital organization, and you're looking at business associates, we all know where to find that on HHS if you're in that field. But they do have a wall of shame that has folks that have been breached or had fines and things levied against them. Another real world example. Not Moss Adams, but I was working with an organization and they decided to hire a managed IT services because their head of IT had quit, and they were a cancer center. The person who owned the business claimed to have the first certification in the state, really pumped up his resume, and we got a call about a month after they contracted with this provider, and IT people would cringe at this, but they just started unplugging network cables from the switches. They didn't mark anything. Cancer center was down for a week, could not provide treatment to their patients. Just imagine if that was your family member. Imagine, if you're the patient, what worries you have to deal with. But if they would have onboarded that managed service provider better, they likely could have not had that incident. And also, it goes into transparency and visibility within your vendors, and that's monitoring what they're doing from when they're accessing your data, why they need access, who's accessing it, what they're doing, did you log it, that activity, so that you can go back and make sure that if something happened, you know who to track down and find out what they did. And that's, maybe you have to develop a watch list of suppliers within your organization. Maybe there's a supplier that you've had a long-term relationship with, and they could have had a problem. They got attacked. No organization is perfect, but maybe you have to put them on a watch list and say, hey, we need to pay closer attention to this organization to make sure that they're not introducing additional risk into our organization. And that's really a lot what that's about. Supply chain risk, introducing additional risk into your organization that could be outside your organization's risk appetite. And so, if they're at a high risk, you may not want to do business with them, but, that's a determination for the executive level team. And then once you offboard those suppliers, keep security in mind. Make sure that their access to your critical data is cut off, or all data to your network, that their email, if they have internal email, that's shut off. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind when it comes to vendors.
All right, Ryan. So there's the fourth polling question. Remember, you need to answer 3 out of the 4. So make a selection and hit submit. Which activity doesn't help prepare you for a future bad day? So go ahead and answer that. And Ryan, another question came in. I said that the board was asking about cybersecurity. Do any organizations provide some sort of board level reports, kind of like an internal control report to boards of directors?
So the question is, do any organizations provide reports to boards of directors? Is that the question? Yes. I don't see it in my listing. Yes, Moss Adams does that. Other organizations I've worked with have done that. So, if there's a report that needs to be done based off some, an assessment of the organization, a report to state of cybersecurity, Moss Adams does do that.
All right. Do you see that a lot? Do you see a lot of companies asking for that in today's day and age?
I'm doing one this afternoon. So, yeah.
Okay. Yes. An uptick since the Twitter was in the news?
They don't respond that quickly usually, but yeah.
All right, we'll close up polling question number 4 and then move on. So which of these activity? I think that's the right answer. So Ryan, I'll turn it back to you for what's next.
Thanks. Okay, so what's next? Very, very high level here. You can't protect what you don't know you have. So inventorying your assets, and that includes your data, your software, your hardware, your external service providers. Those are primarily the things that you're going to want to get an inventory of. And then you perform a risk assessment against those. You're not going to protect all data at the same level unless it's cost effective for you to do that. But, when we talk about storage and capacity management and all of those things, there's likely to be some data sets that are more critical than others that need to be retained longer, which will require more storage, that are more targeted by threat actors. So, you want to identify the risk to your assets. Then you select the controls to help protect those assets and reduce the risk to those assets. So when you're looking at risk, you have your inherent and residual risk. So after you put controls in place, you should have some type of residual risk. Hopefully that the risk is reduced. And if it's not reduced, then you can accept it. or go back to your assets and figure out, what you need to do. If you still need the asset, is it maybe not as high of a priority as you thought it was, and go through that process again.
All right, I'll take this last one, and this is kind of when you reach that basic security hygiene, the cyber hygiene, then what's next, right? And so this really kind of depends on what industry you're in, if there's regulations around that industry, and what the standards are. So there are a number of frameworks that are security frameworks that can help, right? So examples, PCI for those companies that work with credit cards. There's a whole standard around that. There's FedRAMP for cloud providers that want to sell to the government, the U.S. government. There's also NIST, U.S. government standards. There's ISO kind of international standards. There's SOC 2. There's a number of frameworks, right? And not only do they kind of help you secure your organization, but in some instances, they can even provide legal protection. So certain states, I know Utah's one of them, I've done some work with their law, but essentially it said, if you get breached or hacked and somebody comes to sue you because you were hacked, if you can demonstrate that you have a security program based on, and Utah lists 5 security frameworks, but if you've if you've written your security program to be based on one of those 5 security frameworks, then Utah offers you legal protection in that instance, right? So like I say, this is kind of, first I'd worry about, hey, how are we looking from the basic level? But once we get past that basic level, there are many frameworks that may apply. And Moss Adams, we have different service lines that works with all these various frameworks. So, if you have questions, please let us know. We're happy to answer any of those questions. But thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn the time over to Rich now.
All right, thanks everyone for joining. We are running out of time. We're coming up close on the hour. So there were a couple questions regarding what to do next. Feel free to reach out to any of the presenters today. We hope you have enjoyed today's call. I hope that some of you were also able to attend last week's session on internal controls, and that you'll be able to attend next week's session on systems and infrastructure. This digital transformation of all industry has accelerated, and there are a lot of risks out there. So again, thank you for joining. And now I'll turn it over to Amy, who will go through some final housekeeping.
All right, thank you, Rich, and thank you, Devin and Ryan, for a great presentation today. I also want to thank our audience for being engaged and submitting your questions to help guide today's conversation. And in the upper right-hand corner of your console, there is a banner that you can click on to be taken to the registration page for our final session in this series, which will take place next Wednesday. And if you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 2 weeks should you have difficulty downloading it now. And finally, here's a link to an online survey for today's presentation. And thank you for joining our webcast. We hope you'll join us again next time. Take care, everyone.